The farm was founded by my great-grandfather in 1866. My father took over the farm post-World War II, 1946, and he really changed the farm. Under his watch, it went from a polyculture of a lot of different species of animals to a monoculture of only cattle. The farmers, my friends and neighbors and relatives in this community that I love, view what they're doing the same way I used to, as this is fine. That cheap food is not as cheap as it looks like it is. That cheap food is cheap at the checkout counter because many of the costs are spun off for everybody to bear. All of these technologies that give us such a great windfall boom have an unintended consequence. And the unintended consequence requires another technology to cure it. But it causes another unintended consequence. I never lost money when I was managing the farm, very industrially as a monocultural cattle operation. I started making a change. I lost money for a number of years, is making the soil healthy again and the animals healthy again the right thing to do? Yes, it is. Cost effective in the short run? No, it's not. Is it cost effective in the long run? Yeah, probably.
Will, thank you for taking the time to chat today on this episode of Bookmarked. I'm so excited to chat about your book and regenerative grazing and all the concepts that I think a lot of people tend to ignore. People don't really know a whole lot about their food, where it comes from, how it's grown, why it's important. And I think we're going to have a lot of fun going into the details of this here. First, before we get started, though, can you give people a background of both yourself and White Oak Pastures, and maybe highlight some of the ways in which White Oak Pasture does things differently from what someone might find at a traditional farm?
Sure, I will, and thank you for having me on today. I am Will Harris. I own a farm called White Oak Pastures in Bluffton, Georgia. Bluffton, Georgia is almost in Alabama and almost in Florida, in very rural and sadly impoverished Georgia, part of Georgia. The farm was founded by my great-grandfather in 1866. He ran the farm all his life, followed by his son, my grandfather, followed by his son, my father, followed by me, and I am now being followed by two of my three daughters and their spouses. And those two daughters have 5 children here on the farm, who are my grandchildren, who will be the sixth generation on the farm. So we're very proud of that. To tell you about the farm, just briefly, the first 2 generations that managed this farm, my great-grandfather and grandfather, managed it as a very cyclical, fairly all-inclusive kind of an operation. They raised several species of livestock, slaughtered them here on the farm, and sold the meat locally. It had to be local. There was no refrigeration back then. My father took over the farm post-World War II, 1946, and he really changed the farm. Under his watch, it went from a polyculture of a lot of different species of animals to a monoculture of only cattle. And he raised cattle for the industrial model. He shipped cattle to the West and Midwest for finishing on grain, a lot of drugs, a lot of chemicals, pesticides, a very different way of managing the farm than the 2 preceding generations. I went to the University of Georgia, majored in animal science. That had previously been animal husbandry, but it had become animal science. Very, very distinct change. Graduated in 1976, came home, helped my dad run the farm until I ran it. I ran it as a very industrial, monocultural cattle operation. until I decided to change it in the mid-90s.
Amazing. Okay. I first want to start off with some definitions of industrial farming and regenerative grazing. Can you just, and you mentioned that your great grandfather and grandfather ran the farm before the industrial practices kind of took off. I'd love to also contrast regenerative grazing you do today with their methods that they were doing before industrial farming. So we have this like pre-industrial farming era, we have this industrial farming, and then we have this regenerative grazing. Can you kind of compare and contrast for people who may not be familiar what is different about each of those three things?
So industrial farming is very linear. The farm occupies one space in the production fulfillment chain. You raise corn, or you raise cattle, or you feed cattle, or you slaughter cattle. It's very segmented and it's very linear. And it can be scaled up to an incredible size. What we do is very cyclical. The very few income streams leave the farm or come into the farm. We sell our products as much as we can directly to consumers, and we try to be zero waste. There are very few streams leaving the farm.
Mm-hmm. And how does your version of regenerative grazing then compare to the version that your grandfather and your great grandfather would have been doing? Are there any differences? I understand like the cyclical nature of it is the same, but are there differences in the way you implement your practices that they wouldn't have done?
Sadly, I was not here then. They're not here now to tell me about it. Most of what I know, and the Harrises are not necessarily good logbook keepers. But I have studied the farming methods of those generations, those times, and I think that from the cyclical input side, it's very similar. We don't buy fertilizer anymore. We make our own compost here on the farm. We slaughter here on the farm. Uh, Very, very little is thrown away. Everything is utilized in a cyclical, circular sort of a manner. That varies dramatically from what the industry evolved into, which was very linear.
I see. Now, you have experience operating in both this linear fashion and this cyclical fashion. I think it was about 20, 25 years ago that you kind of made this transition and moved the farm to this regenerative grazing system. Can you walk me through what light bulbs went off in your head that made you think it was worthwhile to do this transition?
Yes. So growing up, all I wanted to do is be a very industrial cattleman, just like my dad had been. That I thought that was absolutely the way I wanted to run my life. Certainly, the way I wanted to run the farm. I went to the University of Major Animal Science, and that's the form of animal management they taught. It had been animal husbandry; it had become animal science. Husbandry is very cyclical; science is very linear. And it had made that transition had been made by the time I went. So I went and studied the very linear industry and became good at it, and came home and ran the farm in that manner for 20 years and made money. I went back and looked. I never lost money when I was managing the farm very industrially as a monocultural cattle operation. I didn't make a tremendous amount of money, but I was a good cattleman and we had no debt and we made money and paid taxes every single year. I made the decision fairly suddenly to move away from that because I fairly suddenly became aware of the excesses of that system. The first thing that hit me was the animal welfare. What I had always thought of as being really good animal welfare, I suddenly viewed as no, it's not. and I can tell you more about that if you want to hear it. But very quickly after I embraced the fact that my animal welfare is not as good as I thought it was, I became aware that my land management is not as good as I thought it was. So I started making very radical changes in both of them. And I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I just knew what I didn't want to continue doing. So I
Right.
was, and I did not set out to emulate what my great grandfather and grandfather did. I just set out to run the farm with more focus on animal welfare and environmental sustainability. But it led me back to it, and I was really sort of surprised when I said, this is a lot like what had been done 100 years ago. Now, today we have refrigeration and Department of Agriculture regulations to go by, and there are some differences, but it's far more similar to what my great grandfather and grandfather did than it was to what my dad and I did for so long.
How hard was it to break away from that industrial system once you had spent the first 20 odd years of your career in that system?
I got to say that it was economically very challenging. From a pure enjoy level of enjoyment situation, it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed moving away from it, but it was wrought with financial difficulties that we were very, very fortunate, lucky in our timing. When I decided to make that change, it was in retrospect, it was a best case time to do it. The USDA had not changed their country of origin labeling rules, so I was only competing. I was not competing against imported product, and
Right.
the appetite for grass-fed beef on the increase. And there were just a number of things going on that really were wind in my sails for making the change. And had I waited 10 years, I don't know that we would have made it. Uh,
Right. Do you think economics and just the cost of changing is the big factor that is preventing most farms from switching over? Because the idea of, you know, healing your land, making healthier food, having better animal welfare, I think these are all things that I think most farmers will go, yeah, I'd love all those things. But it seems like the majority of them are still in this industrial system. And so I guess my question is cost that primary reason why they have not switched over?
Cost is a primary reason. Uh,
What are the other ones?
I would say probably the greatest obstacle is the fact that the farmers, my friends and neighbors and relatives in this community that I love, view what they're doing the same way I used to, as this is fine. What I'm
Mm,
doing is fine. It's what my dad did. By now, it's probably what my granddad did. It's what my son or daughter will do when I'm through, and it's fine. And there's a lot of really brilliant marketing people that I'm sure make a lot of money creating a narrative that does lead a farmer and a consumer to think that this industrial production is fine, just fine. It's in fact it's almost noble.
mm,
My friends and neighbors and relatives all still farm very industrially. I got friends that do farm more like me, but they're not right around here.
right.
And these are good people. They feel good about what they're doing to their land. They feel good about what they're doing to their livestock, if they have livestock. Most of them don't. They feel good about the product they're producing. They feel good about leaving it in the hands of their future generations because we've been told for so long that this is what you do. And in reality, Yeah, I think it started off on a very noble path. It started after World War II. Really, there was the industrialization really increased dramatically post World War II. And World War II is the reason World War II gave us munitions factories that could be converted into ammoniated fertilizer factories. Ammoniated fertilizer had been around since the 1800s. It just cost too much to make it.
Huh.
But there were so many munitions plants built to fight wars, and they could be changed over to make fertilizer pretty easily. The money had been spent, they were sitting there, so they made fertilizer. Pesticides were a lot of the pesticide chemistry came out of the war effort, uh, chemistry, nerve gas, and things of that nature.
Huh.
The farmers themselves, those guys that left here during World War II were used to farming with mules. And when they got to Europe, they drove tanks. When they got back home, they didn't want to plow a mule. They wanted an internal combustion engine. I don't blame them. I would have too. And we can go on and on with that. Plus, it created a market. Europe was starving. There was an incredible demand for food of any sort. The technologies were there to produce dramatically increased yields, so people did it. My dad did it. My dad jumped on it. And my dad was very proud that he was a specialist, not a generalist. His dad and granddad had been really good at raising cows and hogs and sheep and goats and peas and corn. And the market had allowed my dad to become a professional cattleman. And he was really good at it. And then I think proud of it. We never had that discussion, but I'm pretty sure that there was a lot of pride in that for him. So
Mm.
it's like a perfect storm.
Yeah.
And so the linear farming industry developed, and all these technologies were used, and the technologies sadly had unintended consequences. Ammoniated fertilizer, which was like a gift from God in terms of what it did for yield, but it destroyed the microbial flora and fauna in the soil. But you could see the super increase in yield. You couldn't see the dying flora and fauna in the soil. That took several years to develop, to manifest itself. So
Right.
if you've got a technology and you can see the benefit, but you can't see the drawback, you're going to embrace that technology. I
Hmm.
compare it to steroids. I was at the University of Georgia in the 70s when steroids were first becoming available. And the guys in the weight room that got into steroids early just really performed. And I can remember wanting some of those damn steroids so bad I couldn't stand it. But before I got them, I figured out that it caused your testicles to shrink, and I didn't want shrunken testicles. So, but that's what we're talking about here. And now we've used these technologies, and all of these technologies that give us such a great windfall boom have an unintended consequence. And the unintended consequence requires another technology to cure it. But it causes another unintended consequence. And that causes I can tell you specifics on how this works, but it's a never-ending chain. And I think in the inception, post-World War II, nobody really understood that. But I
Hmm.
believe today technology companies are fully aware and profiting from it. They know that they can sell a farmer a technology that will solve a problem that he has or perceived problem, but it'll create another problem that will require buying another technology. They'll create another problem, and we can talk specifically about them if you want to. It's never ending.
Yeah. This reminds me of like positive feedback loops where like you create one problem, it creates many more, try and solve the next one, and you create another five, try and solve the next one, you create another five. And I wonder, how does this all end? Is it
And
just
there's a pesticide company making money on every single one of those cures.
right? And often the consequences, as you alluded to, are hard to recognize, sometimes just entirely ignored, but other times just very hard, or very, they take a long time to become obvious.
The-
And I wonder, will we ever get back to a system where we have like all of the consequences in balance with one another, that we kind of like understand the consequences of degrading our soil, understand the consequences of poor animal welfare and all these things? Or will we just continue to use technology and hope that it can solve problems faster than it's creating new ones?
Well, there's your problem. Can we or will we? Because that's two very different answers.
I'll let you take either one.
Well, will we? The answer is probably not. Can we? Yes, I've done it here.
Mm-hmm.
Will we do it? Probably not. It's just so expensive and so painful in the short run. In the short run, we're talking about 20 years. We're not talking about 20 days. The organic model in my land, organic model is not all that's important. It is not, but it's one of the things that's measurable, that you can track more easily. The organic model in my land has gone from 0.5% to over 5%. There's a study on my website, whiteoakpastures.com, done by an third-party environmental engineering outfit from Minneapolis, Minnesota, called Quantis. And they're not ag people, but they're engineers. They did this study, long story, but they did the study, and it's on there. You can see it, and it showed this increase from 0.5% to 5% that I'm telling you about. So let me try to make that important to you. 1% organic matter in soil will absorb a 1-inch rain event, like a sponge. That's about 27,000 gallons per acre is a 1-inch rain event. My soil organic matter is 5%. So it will absorb a 5-inch rain event, and we get them in the coastal plain. My soil and my neighbor's soil and my soil used to be 0.5% organic matter. That's 1/10. It'll absorb a 1/2-inch rain event. So when we get a 5-inch rain event, 4.5 inches washes the topsoil that's left into the creek, and the water's gone. So we need to irrigate. So we need to pump water from the aquifer using diesel or electricity, which has another set of problems. So it is making the soil healthy again and the animals healthy again the right thing to do? Yes, it is. Is it cost effective in the short run? No, it's not. Is it cost effective in the long run? Yeah, probably.
Yeah. It seems like this is a problem that, if I look outside of the scope of agriculture, I see the same problem when I look at like the national debt of America. It's like everyone just is looking towards kicking the can down the road and happy with, an extra $1 trillion of debt and not worried about it. And it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And the problem, it just feels like there's no appetite for solving it today. And so people just say, well, we'll just figure it out whenever it becomes a real problem. And I don't know if, do you think is that a good analogy to understand how industrial farming is working?
I was about to interrupt you. Say that's a good analogy. I mean,
Okay.
It's just so easy, and I think it's kind of made worse. This may not be true. I got to say this out loud. I think it's kind of made worse because there are so many really big technology companies, pesticide companies, food companies making money on the system as it currently is, it will probably not do as well if we were farming in a less destructive manner. And these people, those people, are incredibly gifted in terms of messaging what they're doing to make it seem like it is fine, just fine. They,
Mm-hmm.
I struggle with it. I hear the explanation for why things are done, and I have to think about it a minute before I think, wait a minute, really, that's not right. But you've got this messaging done by brilliant people with incredible resources, and it's just very good advertising PR.
Yeah. So do you think that if we were to make a change and we were to try and build a food system around this idea of regenerative grazing, is it fair to say then that the people who are entrenched in the industrial system today, who are earning a salary from it, who have kind of accepted this as normal, are not going to be the ones to change their mind, and that it may take a separate cohort of people to start, regenerative grazing on their own? Because it doesn't seem like your story is the typical story. It seems like the people who have jumped into regenerative grazing, by and large, are have never been involved in the industrial system and don't want to be part of it. And you seem to be a rare case where you made that transition, but it sounds like most of your colleagues are not willing to make that same transition.
Well, you're right that most people involved in a serious way in regenerative agriculture are not old people that used to farm industrially. That's true. There are some. I'm not the only one. My friend Gabe Brown from North Dakota, and then there's some others around who, and a number of others. But most of the people in this movement are young non-agrarians that have come to embrace this kind of food production, and that I understand that. I probably would not have had I not been a very extreme sort of industrial farmer. I was the guy that pushed the limits really hard, maybe broke the rules a little bit, and so it and the unintended consequences became obvious to me, not because I was particularly sensitive to them, it's because I was probably throwing more triggers than most guys. And I don't know. I wouldn't speak for the other guys that are doing it. But that's what happened with me, uh, and it caused me to want to move away from it. And I was fortunate. Another thing is, I was fortunate in that I had inherited a very nice farm with no debt, a really nice herd of cattle and a little money. And I wasn't rich, but I could afford to do it. When I
Mhm.
started making the change, I lost money for a number of years, but I was
Right.
able to stand it. And I couldn't have withstood it inevitably. In perpetuity, I would have had to. It would have been game over.
Yeah.
But so you got the fact that industrial ag has done such a good job creating their story that it's good, it's fine, just fine, nothing to see here. This is fine. And then you
Right.
couple that with the fact that now it's a generational thing. You've got people, as I said earlier, 2, 3 generations into it. They're doing what daddy and granddaddy did. You take the fact that it's so expensive to do something different. I mean, just so many reasons why people would not transition. And uh, I don't, I'm not offended by farmers that don't transition. I get it. We formed a nonprofit, a 501c3, to help people learn how to transition if they want to. But I'm not uh, I'm not on the speaker circuit begging people to farm like I farm. I'm not.
Hmm.
If you want to learn it, you can come here and we'll make you an intern or whatever we need to do. But I'm not out trying to get it done. And let me
Yeah.
say this. Let's just look at the other side. There are so many really poor people in the world. And I want those people to get to eat every day. And I wish they could eat really good meat and vegetables and milk and fruit that was raised properly. But if they can't get that, I want them to get something to eat. And food raised properly costs more. We should talk about that a minute. And I want those poor people to have something. I don't want those people to be hungry because they can't afford my beef, which is 20% higher than industrial beef.
Right. So there's this additional cost that even though the industrial system does not compete against your system in terms of quality, if someone is at the level where they can't put food on the table, it's preferable to have them use the industrial system over nothing.
Correct.
Yeah.
There's a lot, I don't eat fast food, but if I was somewhere and I was hungry, I mean just a little bit hungry, and I didn't know where I was going to get something good to eat, I'd eat it. I'd
Yeah.
drive over that drive-in window and say, "Shoot, I'd eat this. Give me two of them."
Yeah. So is it right to think then that as the world transitions out of, we have a lot less extreme poverty in the world than we did 20 years ago, 40 years ago, 60 years ago. It seems like gradually all the countries in the world are seeing their quality of life increase. They're starting to earn more money. As that happens and other countries start to experience the luxury of not really having to worry about, am I going to be able to put food on the table tonight? Will we then, do you think, see maybe people start to demand higher quality foods once they've got their basic needs met?
I spent a lot of time learning how to farm regeneratively. I don't know the answer to those kinds of questions. That's just way outside my knowledge base. But I'll tell you this. I'm the guy that just told you we need cheap food for these poor people. I'm the guy that just told you that. All right. Now here's the next thing I'm telling you. That cheap food is not as cheap as it looks like it is. That cheap food is cheap at the checkout counter because many of the costs are spun off for everybody to bear. So and we can talk about many examples. There's a dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico that I think it's about as big as the state of Massachusetts, where there used to be a thriving oyster shrimp fishery, and it's not producing food anymore. It's not producing food anymore because pesticides and fertilizers wash down the Mississippi River and destroy the ecology in the ocean in a huge fishery. Well, now who's going to pay for that?
Mhm.
Not the farmer, not the pesticide company, not the fertilizer company. We're going to all pay for it. So that's a cost that's spun out of the system for everybody to bear.
Right.
They find, I read every week where there's another pesticide found in an aquifer or even at the poles where nobody sprayed pesticide. It's ubiquitous in the system. That that ain't good, and it has a
Right.
cost. Who's going to pay for it? All of us. Yeah,
And
well, I'll tell you
so,
what, I'm going to tell you one more. I can do this all day, and I'm not going to do it to you, but I'll say one more. What this bothers me is species extinction. I'm forever reading about a species of something, insects or birds or mammals that there just aren't any more of them. Now, that species evolved in this ecosystem or whatever ecosystem it lived in, and it had a role there. There was something or some things it did. And when we drive that species into extinction by use of pesticides or whatever it is, what who's going to do that functionality that species used to do? I mean, and these are things that don't they're unintended costs, not unintended, but unnoticed costs. They're unintended and unnoticed, but they exist, but they're not paid for by the pesticide company or the fertilizer company or the farmer or the food company. They're debts to society that we all pay. And those have to be accrued in the cost of that food. So, yeah, my ground beef costs whatever it is. You can look at the website, $9 a pound, whatever the number is. And you can probably find it on sale somewhere for $3. But what about those unintended costs?
Yeah. And then there's the health consequences too, right? You allude to like the beef that is produced at White Oak Pastures is actually healthier than the beef that is coming out of the factory feedlot farms in the Midwest, right?
Well, I think it is, but I'm going to tell you this. I have learned I need to limit my comments to the things I am expert in. And I'm an expert in animal welfare, this environmental impact, and this rural economy in these small towns.
Mm-hmm.
Things like health and safety and these other, I have opinions on them, but there are people who are far more qualified. And I think that the question you raised has an obvious answer. I'd rather somebody else give it than Will Harris.
That's fair. So when you think about some of the ecosystem effects and the animal welfare effects, are there tools that we have today or that we might have in the future to quantify these things? Because you made this great point that it might cost $3 a pound for beef at another place and $9 at White Oak Pastures, and you might think on the surface that these are big differences, and that of course, oh, $3 is less than 9. I'm going to go with that one. But when you add in all the additional costs that don't really get measured, you may have a totally different number at the end. And I guess my question is, is there a way we can come up with numbers in those for animal welfare and for this ecosystem damage that can kind of level the playing field a bit?
Well, I can certainly show you. Can I come up with numbers? No, I mean I can't. In the case of what you just said, if you ever visited an industrial cattle feedlot or hog feedlot or poultry house, and then you visit a farm that's doing it right, it'll be so obvious to you. I mean, if you don't know anything about livestock, it'll just be so obvious to you. There's what we do. Let's talk about animal welfare just a minute. We just take that and we can do the other. We now allow the animal to express instinctive behavior. That's good animal welfare. What I used to do that I thought was great animal welfare kept the animals well fed, well watered, in a comfortable temperature range. We didn't inflict pain and suffering on them. And I would have argued with you endlessly that this is good animal welfare. But it did not allow the animals to express instinctive behavior. I say cows are meant to roam and graze, pigs are meant to root and wallow, chickens are meant to scratch and peck. And in the industrial confinement model, those activities are deprived from those animals. They can't do that. And when they can't follow those instinctive behaviors, those instinctive needs, it creates stress, 24/7 stress. And if you visit one of those places, if you don't know anything about animals, you don't need to know anything about animals. Just look. You can see it. Now, if you're not looking for it, you won't see it. But if you're an industrial cow or chicken or pig guy, you won't see it. I didn't for years. I had thousands of them. But if you look objectively, it's just very obvious. And the same is true in terms of the economic impact of the community. We can talk about that all day. To the environmental impact, to the land, to the water, to the atmosphere. It goes against the cycles of nature, and when you go against the cycles of nature, it has an impact. as an effect, and it's not going to be good.
Hmm. I'd love to get into the local economy aspect here. And you've had the experience of living in Bluffton, Georgia your whole life, and you've seen this community evolve. I'd love to understand how the industrial system has kind of changed the fabric of the community. And maybe if you can speak to some of the other regions in America that you're familiar with, and just, is this an isolated thing to Bluffton, or is this happening everywhere?
What I'm about to tell you about has happened everywhere that I know of, where agriculture is a driver in the economy. I think it was probably particularly notable in Bluffton, Georgia, because in Bluffton we never had a railroad, we never had a mill, we never had a factory. It so happened it was a purely agrarian economy. It's not the only one there is, but it's an extreme case. But what I'm going to tell you about doesn't require it to be purely agrarian. It's just that the more agrarian it is, the greater the impact. So, well, first let me tell you where we are. We have about 170 white oak pastures. We have about 170 employees. We're the largest private employer in this county. My payroll is $100,000 every Friday. And some Thursdays I don't know where I'm gonna find it on Friday, but I always have. So that is the economic driver that has allowed things to be better here because of white oak pastures. When I was running this farm in the 70s and 80s, I had probably 3, maybe 4 employees, pretty minimum wage kind of people. Good people, but just I couldn't pay them much. They couldn't get a job making much. So, as an economic driver in Clay County, Georgia, I wasn't doing much. We started changing the way we farm, and one learns that when you change the way you farm, you can't just change the production method in the field. You got to change more stuff. I say there are 3 legs on the stool. There's production out in the field, there's processing, and then there's marketing, distribution. You raise cows and sheep and goats, but you can't sell cows and sheep and goats. You got to sell beef and pork and lamb. So you got to make that transition. And then you've got to get it to the people that are willing to and are able to buy it. So 3 legs on the stool. And when I started operating it that way, the number of employees went up and up and up and wound up being 170 people and $100,000 a week. And when that happened, it changed the town. And the bringing about change for the animals and the land were early objectives of mine. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to fix that. Didn't know how, didn't know if I could. That's what I wanted to do. I never sought to improve the economic conditions in the town. That was not on my to-do list because the town had been in decline since World War II. It followed the farm. So, and I was born in 1954. So it was declining when I was born. It's declined all my life. And fixing it was not something I thought I could do. It was not something I tried to prioritize. But when we started changing the farming methods here, I can remember a day I had a visitor, and we were here in town. I'm right here in the middle of Bluffton right now. And he said, "This is a nice little town." And I was waiting for the punchline, and there wasn't one. And I looked, I said, this is a nice little town. And it had happened very organically, not USDA organic, but very, and I didn't set out to do it, and I didn't notice it, but now it's a goal of ours. And we have bought just about every house and lot storefront that sold in this town in the last 20 years, and plan to continue doing it. And we fix them up. We put nice people in them, and this is just a pleasant place. You need to come see us in Bluffton, Georgia. It's just
I'd love to.
we
Uh,
we built we have a store, a restaurant. We offer lodging. We got an RV park. We got a stable of horses. We've added a lot of things here intentionally that don't make a lot of money, but we did it intentionally to make it a better place for me and my children and my grandchildren and my employees and my visitors.
are there any lessons that you've learned from this experience of revitalizing Bluffton or helping to revitalize this community that you can share for other communities that are experiencing some level of decline as well, especially rural ones? Because in the book you mentioned that that over the course of the 20th century, it started with about 41% of Americans in rural regions in agriculture, I believe, and then it got down to about 1% today.
Yeah.
And so I imagine there's a lot of communities that are also suffering some level of decline as a result of that. And if you have, do you have like a playbook or any kind of frameworks you can share with people to help them kind of kickstart their own communities and revitalize them?
Well, playbook might be a little bit, that might be reaching a little bit, but I can tell you some things that I think will help you. And here it is. USDA publishes studies that show what percent of the food dollar the farmer gets. And I think it's about 15 cents. The most recent one I saw about the food, the farmer gets about 15 cents of every food dollar that the consumer spends to buy Cheerios or Campbell's soup or whatever you eat, potato chips. We sell about I think it's $28 million worth of product a year. We sell half of it, almost a little less than half of it wholesale. We sell a little over half of it direct to consumers. Most of it online, shipped with FedEx and UPS. When I sell food direct to a consumer, I get 100 cents of every dollar, not 15 cents of every dollar. Now, I don't get to keep that 100 cents. This is a very break-even-ish business. We need to talk more about that probably. But when I get that 100 cents of every dollar, the reason I break even is I pay $100,000 for payroll. I just mentioned that. We pay for other local services. The money doesn't fly out of here going to Silicon Valley and Wall Street or overseas or wherever food dollars go. It stays here and turns. So that's the economics of how it works.
Right. And so there's maybe an interesting place for technology to play a role where you have this like direct to consumer business now enabled by, you know, refrigeration, the fact that we now have highways and reliable transportation networks that you can now basically build an entire business and keep the money in the local region because of all these kind of additional opportunities for you to scale outside of the local economy. Is that fair to say?
That is fair to say. And I will say this too. It triggers me saying that I've said some things that are negative about technology. I am not anti-technology. You know, we have had. I was the first person I know that owned a drone. I wasn't the first person that bought one, but I was the first person that I knew. I think we're on our fourth drone. We just wear them out.
Nice.
You can't see it, but there's a screen right there. It's got 70 cameras on it. It's all over my farm. It's flashing through them. You know, I am not anti-technology. I am anti-technology when it has unintended consequences that cause me to use another technology to fix it, and another one, and it's a downward spiral.
Mm-hmm. How do you distinguish between the two? Like it's clear to me that the drones don't have that same impact that the pesticides have, but I'm sure there's other examples where you're faced with a question of whether or not to adopt a technology, and you have to think a bit, and you have to go, is there an unintended consequence that could come from this, or is this something that is just going to kind of amplify my ability to do my work? And I'd love to hear how you think through that.
Well, the answer is we're not clairvoyant. We try things and find out that this does have an unintended consequence, and we're not going to do that anymore. It's nice. It feels good. I don't know what your weakness is in terms of eating, whether it's sweets or what, but you it doesn't mean that stuff's not good to you. It means it's not good for you, so you don't let yourself do it. And
Right.
we do that a lot. I can't. I think a while come up with some examples, but there are things that we do. Okay, so AI to you means artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
AI to me means artificial insemination. I mean, that's what I learned at the University of Georgia College of Agriculture in the '70s. And I thought that artificial insemination of cattle was just great. And I thought it was fantastic because you could get, there are bulls that the artificial insemination company, semen companies have that they paid $1 million for. And they paid $1 million for that bull because it's a freak of nature. It's got a ribeye big as my hat. And you can buy that semen fairly cheap because one ejaculation can be used to fertilize 1,000 cows. So you can buy it fairly cheap. And I would buy it and artificially inseminate my cattle. And I thought I felt great about it until I didn't feel great about it. And now I feel terrible about it. I would never do that again, although I did it for years. And the reason is because that bull is valued because it has a huge ribeye, but it's a freak of nature. I mean, there's something else going on with that bull that's not remarkably good. So I started saving my own bulls. I saved my own bulls and females. And the bulls I select don't have a ribeye as big as my hat. They have 4 good legs and 2 good testicles and 1 good penis and 2 good eyes, and they're able to compete in this ecosystem better. So, so many of these blessings of technology have unintended consequences that you don't recognize until far down the road.
Mm-hmm. One other thing I want to touch on, we kind of alluded to it a little bit with the local discussion, but local food has kind of been like, I mean, I remember growing up hearing people talk about you should eat local, eat within 100 miles of your area. I'd love to hear your perspective on that, if that is something that everyone should be doing, if some of the technologies like refrigeration and transportation networks, if that has enabled us to spread beyond just our local region. Because I mean, I go to a grocery store and at first I don't even think about where the food comes from, but if I do think about it, I start seeing my avocados are from Mexico, my pineapples are from Hawaii, my everything's from everywhere, right? So how important is it that we are eating the things that kind of come from our local region?
I think we probably should do that, but now let's be clear. Every morning I'm gonna drink a big cup of coffee, and I don't grow coffee on this farm. I'm gonna get coffee from South America or wherever it comes from.
Mm-hmm.
So it's while I do think that eating as locally as you can is a good thing to do, I think there are other considerations that go into it, and I want it to be grown in an ecologically proper manner. I want it to be grown without cruelty. I want it to be grown compensated for fairly, and the so I don't. I think that when we put so much, I think we put so much emphasis on food miles. That probably was not the best definer that we could have used. For
Mhm.
me, it's more non-corporate. When you scale up a food production system in perpetuity the way we have, is when it starts falling apart. No, it doesn't fall apart. It throws off costs. That's the way it falls apart. And I think that food grown properly cannot be scaled up exponentially. So with scale comes efficiency and economy, but there are a cyclical system cannot be scaled up in perpetuity. A linear system can be scaled up pretty much in perpetuity. So I think that whether people want to hear it or not, the name of the game is going to be dealing with farms that are smaller, more direct, not multi-million or billion-dollar companies, but dealing with a more direct manner. And I think you still going to have to get your coffee from somewhere besides Bluffton, Georgia. But and then I think it would be better if you could get it in Bluffton, Georgia. But you can't do what you can't do. So I
Right.
think that shipping food is something we should try to uh, do as little of as we can. But it is not the highest priority of things to not do.
Right. I see. And so if we imagine then a world where we have many smaller farms, does that also lead to a return to the rural areas from the city? Like we talked about this transition where we had 41% of Americans living in rural areas farming to down to 1%. By embracing kind of smaller, more local farms that are not linear systems, do we nudge that number from 1%? Can that come back to 10, 20, 30% and
We,
kind of like regrow the system?
we have demonstrated that in Bluffton, Georgia. It's,
I'd be curious to know what is the population change
yeah.
over the course of your lifespan?
I don't know. I can't get a
Okay.
good I can't get a good feeling. And a lot of my employees that have moved here don't live in town. They live where they can. We got a little
Right.
housing problem in Bluffton. We're just starting to build some. I bought every house that's sold in recent history, but we're starting to build some now. And two of my employees built really nice. Management built really nice houses here, and we're about to. In fact, we've already ordered our first. I I hate to say tiny house. Uh, Tiny houses are tiny, and they cost $100,000 because they put little drawers and cabinets, and these are cabins that I don't know what we're going to have in them, probably $40,000 or $50,000 that are comfortable and clean and warm in the winter and cool in the summer, and for my employees to live in.
Mhm.
I'm really excited about it.
Are there any other qualitative changes that you've seen to the area? Things that might not be immediately obvious, or things that are difficult to illustrate in raw numbers? Like I'm thinking about like just the vibe that you get when you walk down the street in town, or the is crime lower or higher, or is do you have a perception on like education? Are people like educating themselves more than they were in the past, or any other qualitative changes that you've noticed in the city?
A lot of them. And I probably shouldn't use this one, but you asked. I'm gonna tell you. So Bluffton is. I think there's 7 roads leading into Bluffton, and no police. And it was a fantastic place for drug deals. No police. 15 miles to the nearest town that has police. and all these roads come in and out. It's just and poor people, just a great place to do drug deals. And a long time ago, we realized that that's what was happening. Drug dealers would pull up to a corner somewhere and park, and for 2 or 3 hours, cars would come and go. And me and my cowboys started when we'd spot them, we'd all go park, and you could see them in there. They were just be three of them in the car. They would just raise and sand about it, but they wouldn't say anything to us. But they'd leave. And we did that for I don't know twice a week for 3 weeks, and we hadn't had a drug dealer since. So we still don't have a policeman, but we got that taken care of. That probably wasn't the best story to tell, but that did happen. And this is a very pleasant place. We have every Thursday we have Thirsty Thursday. I think they sell beer for half price, maybe cheaper than that. I don't know what they sell it for, but my employees show up for Thirsty Thursday, and it is the grounds around the store and my restaurant up here are just full of children. I got 5 grandchildren, and everybody else does too. And those kids right now from 3 to 13, you know, and nobody's worried about if they don't step on a snake, nothing's going to happen to them. I mean, nobody's going to bother.
That's awesome.
I can go on about the kind of benefits that we have enjoyed. And that's why we get so many good employees. We have employees that come in from all over at least all over the country, and we've had some international employees in the past. Just it's quality of life. It's not because I pay them so much. I can't afford to pay them that much, but the quality of life is really, really good.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious to know why, like you seem to be having more success with this system now over time. Like the first couple of years you mentioned, the regenerative grazing system was there was a big cost to it. You weren't sure if you'd be able to get through. Now it seems like you've got stability and you've got like a real community behind here, and like there's a lot of employees, and it's the wheels are churning right now. Have you noticed, like, can you give me a comparison to help me understand, like, how much better is it today than it was 20 years ago to be operating on this kind of a system?
Yeah.
For people who are considering changing their farming practices, I think it'd just be helpful to know that, yes, it may be true that the first few years are going to be tough, but just to give people some idea of what may be on the horizon 10, 20 years later, once they've really got this system rolling. Can you kind of illustrate that?
I don't know if this will be supportive or negative towards what you want to accomplish, but I'll tell you what the economics is. And the only reason we're able to do this is because we've got about $10 million in debt. We've got about $30 million in assets. And we have a very low return on investment. I mean, I have friends who are accountants, MBAs, CPAs, CEOs, and I'm pretty free about discussing their numbers with them. And they think I'm as crazy as a run over chicken for taking on this much risk with that lower return on investment. And they're probably right. I get it. But it's a different economics altogether. I think that in addition to screwing up when we went from replicatable to linear, similarly on the finance side, we made an equally gargantuan mistake. And that is we changed our idea on agriculture to a very short-term window versus what it had been. Today in business, economic performance is judged based on a very short-term window. Monthly report, quarter report, annual report. That's not the way it is in agriculture. In agriculture, the primary investment is in land which is a non-depreciating asset. Once you own it, it's never worth less in the short run. In the long term, it's going to be worth more and more and more, at least stay flat. But we're looking for a return on it, and we borrow money to buy land, and we got to pay it back with interest starting the first month. And that's just not the way that system works. In my case here, I am the fourth generation of my family to be on this farm. I'll be certainly followed by the fifth. They're committed for the next 30 years. They're 30, so they're committed for the next 30. And then they have babies, some of which will probably choose to be here. Now, as long as they're producing food and fiber farming, they will never achieve a really high return on investment because that's not the way it works. I don't know what the economics was when my great grandfather and grandfather were here, but they weren't getting a big return on investment. They were operating the farm in perpetuity. So it's a completely different system. In the same way that we applied the linear model to the cyclical model, we have applied this very short-term economic system that deals with depreciating assets to this very long term in which the investment is not depreciating asset. The land and the herd lasts forever.
Mm.
The individual animal in the herd has a lifespan. It's 24 years for a cow. But the herd lasts for literally forever because you're repeating. The animals are breeding, growing, spinning off an abundance that we monetize, but you've always got 1,000 cows, if that's your number. You've always got 2,000 acres of land, if that's your number. And not only do the land and the animals not depreciate, if they're managed right, they get better and better. So if you're looking for a short-term return on investment, don't look here.
One thing I want to highlight here is I think it's really admirable that you and your family have been able to keep this farm in the family for, I think in the book it was 160 years, something like that.
That's not right.
And most companies don't last 160 years. I mean, I look at the S&P 500 and it's like, Facebook was started in like 2004 and Google was started in 1999. And like, we got a lot of companies that are like 10, 20 years old. If I tried, maybe I could think of a couple companies that are 100 years old, but I can't think of many. And I'd love to hear your perspective on how you have been able to do this.
Well, make no mistake, white oak pastures will come to an end one day. There's no doubt about it. I don't know what day, I don't know what generation. But so I can probably get in trouble for making this statement, but I'm going to make it. The old European manner of leaving the estate to the eldest son had some merit. Now, eldest son was a cop-out. That wasn't good. But to leave it to the family members who are committed to perpetuation is what you ought to do. And my family's not that smart, but the fact is my dad was an only child. So he inherited the farm. I'm an only child. So I inherited the farm. I have 3 children, and they're all sweethearts, all girls, they're all sweethearts. But I'm leaving the farm 100% to the 2 that have come back here to run it. That wasn't a very popular decision, but I made it. And I think that no business is perpetual. They'll all come and go eventually. But when you're a stock company, well, you can sell it all tomorrow and buy it all back in the next day and sell it all the next day. That's not meant to persist. And so many of these corporate structures that we have embraced uh, are doomed to fail because they're not going to be perpetual.
Hmm. Do you think that part of the reason why you made this kind of shift to regenerative and this like commitment to quality is because this is like a legacy and this is part of the family business, and this there's like an accountability that someone who was not part of a family business might not have to experience or might not have to deal with, that they can kind of make their own decisions, and you had, you know, a family legacy kind of to uphold. Do you think that contributes to the quality of product on the farm?
I would like to say yes and believe that's the case, but that's a little too noble. I mean, it wasn't quite that good. I literally became disenchanted with what I was doing to my land and my animals, so I started doing something different. As it worked out, it wound up being remarkably similar to what my great grandfather and grandfather had done, and so I followed that thread, and two of my daughters embraced that, and it was not so noble as choosing a higher and better path. It wasn't that good. I wish it was. I wish I could tell you it was, but I can't do it with a straight face.
I appreciate the honesty. Are there any lessons you talked in your book about there was a difficult transition from your dad to you in the ownership of the farm, and then now you're going to be facing a transition at some point where you have to decide, okay, here's who's going to run the farm next. What are some lessons for like how to gracefully hand off and kind of perpetuate the legacy?
But there's been a lot of good news on that front for me. So my dad was an only child, and I'm an only child, and we both were very alpha male personalities, and we fought like tigers all the time about any little thing. And by the way, I never ever won an argument. Never, not one time. But I didn't quit arguing and fighting. And ultimately, my dad had dementia and died. I took over the farm a long time ago, and I ran it very autonomously because I was the only one here. And when my first daughter, she's actually my middle daughter, she was the first one to want to come back. I had very mixed emotions. I said, boy, that's nice. Another generation coming back. And they said, oh man, I can't go through the kind of fighting my dad and I did. I mean, that it was horrible. I tell people my mother left the kitchen table crying 10,000 times because he and I had gotten nose to nose. But it hadn't been that way. I don't know if it's gender difference or what, but my daughters and my in-laws and I never ever fight, and I think it's probably more to their credit than mine. We do manage it like a business. There are certain areas of responsibility that are mine. All of my uh, all of my children and in-laws and some non-family members are very active in management and are in charge of departments. There are 7 directors, me, 2 children, 2 in-laws, 2 non-family members. This supervise about 20, I think it's 21 managers who supervise the other 100 and whatever employees that's left. And it's structured, and everybody knows what they're in charge of. And the management staff meets in this office once a week, and we discuss things, and we don't fight much. We may not agree fully on everything, but there's not much. It's not like my dad and I.
Hmm. When you think about the future of the farm, are there any changes that you'd like to see introduced or that things that you're working on? Or do you feel like right now you've got this system, this cyclical system working in concert with nature the way it's supposed to, and you're just going to kind of let it operate? Like, I'd love to hear your kind of vision for the future.
No, I tell my management staff all the time, this thing's gonna change. The old saying is the sun don't shine on the same dog's ass all the time. If the dog don't move, the sun will. So they will fail dismally if they don't make changes. And I can't tell them what changes they need to make after I'm gone. I struggle to tell them what changes to make while I'm here. We make mistakes, but they're going to have to be free to change. Uh, this is still primarily a cattle operation. Uh, that probably, and as long as I'm running it, that's what it'll be because that's what I'm good at. It's what I came up doing. It's what I like. But if I knew that in 10 years they were going to sell all the cows, that's okay. I mean, if that's what they need to do, that's what they do. They need to have that freedom to make those changes.
Mm-hmm. And what about let's talk about the future of technology, if we can, a little bit. Like, I know in the book, you highlight a lot of the problems with technology as it has been used to kind of like change the way food is produced. I'd love to look forward and think about, are there ways that technology can enhance this like cyclical system of farming? Does it have to necessarily be that it gets in the way and causes a bunch of unintended consequences, or can we use it to, I don't know, accelerate this system or somehow augment it to make it more resilient?
Absolutely. I am not anti-technology. I have to keep saying that because I do begrudge so many of the applications of technology that we have embraced. But technology, I've got as nice a cell phone as you or anybody else has got. And I told you we've worn out 4 drones, and we got all kind of technologies here on the farm. But you've got to weigh the benefits and the uh, unintended consequences and be sure that it and uh, there are few tools that we use that are all good. I mean, just
Mm.
about everybody has some unintended negative consequence, but you just got to be sure you understand what it is and that it's worth the cost. You know, Wild Pasture is not a Garden of Eden. That just where everything is sweetness and light, and just spins off abundance, and everything's fine. We have changed the ecosystem to fit what we think we need to produce. And when you uh, make those choices, it brings about consequences. It's not this. This is not the ecosystem it would be if people just disappeared right now. There, we,
Mm.
we, we raise uh, cattle and sheep and goats and hogs, so we got a market for them. And when we do that at the expense of some other species. We try we try hard to not annihilate anything. When you manage for the benefit of a species, you do so at the detriment of other species.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully, it's not fatality. Hopefully, it's not a complete detriment. But
Yeah.
my neighbor down the road manages his farm as a beautiful quail habitat.
Huh.
And then he kills a lot of predators to make it a beautiful quail habitat. And uh, I manage my property to be a grazing property. So I
Right.
don't kill some of those predators that he would kill, but I keep my vegetation uh, bit off by consumed by the animals too short to do a great job raising quail. So there are what you choose to produce is at the cost of other species.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'd like to understand. So, after reading your book, I find myself convinced that this is the right approach, but I also find myself totally out of my depth because I'm not a farmer and never have been. And I'm reading this and I'm like, it all makes sense to me, but I don't really know what I'm talking about, and I'm just kind of like introducing myself to the ecosystem through books. I'm reading a lot. I'm learning that way. I haven't actually spent much time on a farm at all. So I'd love to hear you try and make the steelman argument for why regenerative agriculture or regenerative grazing is not the right path. In what context or circumstances might this not be a good idea? Have you heard any persuasive arguments from folks in the industry that you go, you know what, that argument makes sense in certain contexts?
Yeah, I think the main one you would hear is that there are people who would argue that if we're just going to manage a farm the way I manage mine, it has a limited production capacity, and the earth has a carrying capacity of people, and the idea has come that we can produce plenty of food no matter what the population is, because there'll be another technology that will exponentially increase production. And I argue with that by saying that the earth has a limited carrying capacity. I don't know what it is, but you can't exponentially increase the number of people that live on this earth in perpetuity, and it'll be fine, just fine. That can't happen. So if maximum population is the consideration, and it would be if anybody's above the maximum, right? Then we need to embrace whatever food production system will support the most people. And the industrial farmer would argue that theirs will produce more food per acre than mine would. So you can have more people on Earth, and I can argue with that. The Earth has a limited carrying capacity, and
Right. I think you made an interesting comment. I believe it was in the book that you said something like, people will argue that, oh, you can't feed the whole world, but you took the approach of like, I'm just trying to feed my community.
yeah.
I'm just trying to do this here in Bluffton, and then if we can get 1,000 others doing the same thing in their communities, that would be a great outcome.
And I stand by that.
Yeah. How can you talk to me about the progress you've seen in people adopting regenerative grazing practices over the last 25 years? Like in the, I mean, I'm so new to this that I have no sense for how this trend is developing. I've really only been looking at this stuff and caring about where my food comes from for the last year or two. So I'd like to understand like what momentum you're seeing behind grass-fed beef and all the kind of like the trends in consumers and then in producers as well. Are you seeing momentum building? Is it in a particular part of agriculture or is it widespread?
The biggest impediment to farming properly, producing food properly, is greenwashed product. And I watched that happen. When I first started producing grass-fed beef, there was no greenwashed product because the big food companies weren't focused on us. It was such a small part of the market; it wasn't worth the effort. At some point, the big food companies decided that uh, the influence brought about by good land management, good water management, good animal welfare, the other things, do hold sway with a lot of people. So at that point they had a choice of changing the way they produce or changing the way they talk about what they produce. And it was cheaper and easier to change the way they talk about what they produce. And they have brilliant people to greenwash product, and it's highly effective. And it has put a lot of farmers that are doing it right out of business because
Mm.
they can't compete.
Now, on balance, do you find that to be a negative or a positive? Because you could also make the argument that the greenwashing is a step away from industrial agriculture. It may not be the full leap to regenerative grazing. It may still be deceptive in the fact that it's not accurately portraying what it actually is. But if it does make the jump from a worse industrial system, how do you balance that out? Do you view that as progress or not?
Not,
Mm.
yeah. I,
So it's just like we got to get people to make the full jump and know the intermediate steps aren't that effective.
we got to get people to really know. No, but we do have people that have got to really know how the food is produced, and then they can make the decision. Yeah, this is okay, or no, this is not okay.
Mm-hmm. Why do you think people don't have much of an interest in that? I mean, I'm shocked at myself for living my entire life not knowing how my food was produced.
I think
Um,
it's a matter of bandwidth. You know, you just got so many things you're focused on, and
mhm.
and the food companies have done such a good job making you feel good about what they do that that's not a priority.
Right. And
And more people are focused on it now than have been in previous generations. You know, my mother was born in 1920, and she thought that if they sold it at the grocery store, it's fine. It's just fine. If it weren't fine, they would not have it at that grocery store. And if the pharmacist recommended it, it's good for you. You should take it. My wife was born in 1954. I'm not supposed to say that, but she was. And she is not nearly as convinced as my mother, but not nearly as uh, inquisitive as my daughters. And my daughters, they don't believe anything they're told. They want to see. They want to know more about it. And I think we're seeing that trend uh, happen. And I'm not saying that everything that you put in your body needs to be pristine. But I think you need to know what the truth is. And then you decide.
right. It feels like that's a trend that we're seeing again outside of agriculture too, where the trust that people have in their institutions, the institutions that were once, so powerful that you would never dare question them. The New York Times or even the government, it's like you would never dare question them 50 years ago, and now it's like these institutions have seen their trust decay. Are these factors related?
Yeah, and I think pendulums swing, and I think the pendulum has swung so far that you have to say, wait a minute, I don't believe that.
Hmm. Yeah, it's fascinating. Okay, I want to end things here and kind of maybe just before we go, can you share any final words of advice for people who are interested in regenerative grazing? Maybe they're interested in setting up their own farm. Maybe they're just looking to learn more about their food. Any final words that you can leave people with as like a parting message?
I'll leave them with the hope that this recent change by the Department of Agriculture to USA gives me hope. I told you that there were times that when I in the early 2000s we made really good money, a good return on investment in this business. That waned to the point that it got really hard for us, and we were in it, making it exponentially harder for someone who's trying to get in this business. I think that this change with that rule on Product USA is going to make it a little better again, open the door back a little bit, and I'm hoping that there'll be producers that are able to get in this business and increase their scale in this business that have been struggling over the last 10 years or so.
Yeah, awesome. Well, listen, thank you so much for taking the time to chat today. Thank you for writing your book. I'll leave a link for everyone in the show notes. Any other places people can go to learn more about you and your business?
that social media. I don't know too much about it, but Instagram and website and all those things that you do that I don't do that you probably do. But and come
All
see
right.
us. And come see us. We really enjoy having people here. And it's not quick and easy to get to Bluffton, Georgia, but I think we offer a lot.
Yeah, that'll be fun.
You come.
All right.
You come. You come see us.
I will. I'll make a trip.
All right.
Have a good one. Thanks again for taking the time.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.